3D workshop. Today we're going to be looking at textures and UV maps, and we're going to create this barrel that you can see next to me. So let's jump into it, shall we? The first thing we're going to want to do is open up Blender, and we'll just delete everything for now. We can add it later once again if we need it. Minimize the timeline, and let me just get screencast keys going. Once again, they're in the bottom left, so should you need to reference the keys that I'm pressing at any time, it's just down here, okay? So before we jump into texturing our mesh that we're going to create, I just want to show you something called UV editing. Now, we are making a barrel, so let's start with something to help us out. Let's start with a cylinder. When I add this into the scene, I'm in the UV editing mode at the top here. And now you can make your own if you want to, and we're actually going to do that in this lesson. So I'm going to just drag out from the left, make a new window. I'm going to duplicate 3D viewport. Okay, so that's what it is currently. And let's open up the UV editor, scroll in, and the controls for moving around in the UV editor are the same as the 3D viewport. However, it's a 2D space, so you can't pan and orbit anything within this space. It is just 2D, with X going left to right and Y going up and down or forward and back. If I just put a period on my numpad, let's zoom into this. So we all know what a cylinder is by now, and this is what we're going to start modeling into a barrel in just a moment. But I just want to give you a quick overview of what a UV map is. So if we go into edit mode by pressing tab, you can see that this cylinder is broken down into these islands. And in here, we've got the same sort of options at the top. We've got vertices select, edge select, face select. I just select face select and then click these arrows, which is UV sync selection. Okay. And that just means by clicking those arrows, if I click them again, because nothing is selected in my 3D viewport, I can't see anything in my UV editor. But if I click sync selection, you can now see, even though I haven't got anything selected, we can still see the UV map. And that's normally ideal. There are exceptions, and if we ever need them, we'll cover that in future lessons. So you can see pretty quickly what's going on here. A UV map is a 2D image that represents a 3D mesh. Now, if I come over here into the 3D viewport and select this top face, you can see with that one selected on our UV map, we've got this circle or n-gon selected just here. If I come underneath and select this one, that's that one. And then if I Alt and left mouse button click on this line, select all of the faces around the side, you can see that they are this top shape just here, okay? And although this top one looks like it's lots of individual faces, which it is, with regards to the UV editor, these are one island. So if I just select them again, that's an island, this is an island, and this is an island. Okay, and that's what they're known on the UV editor. If I just come out of that and delete the cylinder, let's have a look at another shape. Let's have a look at the cube. And once again, go into edit mode. You can see that the cube, all the primitive shapes come ready unwrapped. It's only once you start manipulating these and turning them into other things such as characters, props, vehicles, windows, whatever it is you're making, that you might need to re-unwrap it, okay? Out of the box, all of the primitive shapes, all of these, even the monkey, even Suzanne, they come pre-unwrapped, okay? Which is very, very useful. And looking at this cube, you can see with this shape just here, this is very similar to some old school projects that we would have done, where you got given a bit of paper and you'd cut out this sort of cross crucifix shape. It might have come with some little tabs on it, which we don't need in 3D digital space, but it works very similar. So if we look at this, if this was back at school, we were making a nice dice or we were making a crate in art class, we would have stuck this edge just here to this edge just here. Same for this to this one to this one. I'm sure you can remember by sticking the relevant edges to the corresponding edge that they're about to touch. By doing so with our 2D image, we would create a 3D shape. And in essence, that's what we're doing here in Blender, but we're doing it in reverse. So once you've spent loads of time, let me just delete the cube. Once you've made a character, so say we'd made Suzanne from scratch, let's say she wasn't a primitive shape. We've made this character, it's taken us days, and we're really, really happy with it. What we would then do is we would go around and we would tell Blender where we want to cut this 3D object up. and then we would unwrap it. And you've got a menu up here called UV, and you might have had a little wander and a little play. And this is all to do with unwrapping. Okay. Now, Suzanne does come pre-unwrapped. I was just using her as an example. But you can see here, if I hold my mouse over this section and press L to select linked, you'll see that this part of the UV map is all of that. Okay. This one's going to, I guess, is the eye. Yep. Same for this one. And then we've got an ear and we've got an ear. And if I just open this up a little bit, what happens with the UV map when you're unwrapping your models is you want to try and always unwrap your mesh in an optimal way. You always want to work optimally when you're working in Blender. And this is just a good example. So we've got the majority of our character has been unwrapped into this nice symmetric uniform shape. It's inside. I know it looks like it's not, but if we come right down, you can see it's inside this square here, inside this UV map, okay? And that's what you want to do. So just moving forward with regards to unwrapping, you want to try and use as much of this space up as possible without going outside of it. And we'll go into why you don't want to do that later on in the course. But for this lesson, we're keeping it nice and simple. And I just wanted to show you what a UV map was. So let's get back to the task at hand. We were going to create a barrel. So if I just bring this cylinder in, we already could say that that is a pretty good barrel, okay? It comes unwrapped. We can add a material, because in the last lesson, I showed you how. But we want to add a texture to our material now. So before we do that, we want to make sure that our mesh, our object, our asset is the correct scale. It looks right. Because if we look at the scale of this, or the size of this, the scale is 1, but the size is 2 meters up and down, 2 meters in dimension. Okay. And that's a little bit big for a barrel. If you were building a VR game or an AR game and you had a 2 meter square barrel, this would be absolutely huge. You'd have to be over 2 meters to put something on the top of it, and to pick it up, well, you probably wouldn't be able to. So before we get into the texturing, let's make the barrel the correct size, and then we'll apply a material, and then we'll apply a texture. So what is the size of a barrel? Well, this is where you've got a few different options. You can either use an AI. Most computers, if you're on Microsoft or Windows, come with Copilot, and you can just ask Copilot. So what is the average size of a barrel or oil drum? And AI is pretty good. And there we go. We've got the height, we've got the diameter, and this is just average. You can also go online, and we've got a little bit of an insight about what we're going to be doing. Let's choose a fresh one, and we could do the same thing. Average size, average dimensions of a barrel. And we get some information there. So if you're not fond of AI, you can just come into Google or Bing, and you can do a search, and it will tell you just there. So we're going to use this straight away. Let's get our barrel looking good. So what we're saying. So the height of the barrel is around 34.5 inches. Okay. We're working in meters. Well, you can come across to this little teardrop to the scene properties, come down to unit, and change it from, because if you notice, the length is in meters at the minute. So this is all metric. I can click here, come down to imperial, and you can see some of them change. Now the length is feet. And if you look here at our dimensions, we are now in feet and inches. So depending on where you are in the world, or depending on the references that you've got, you might want to change this. I'm going to stay in metric. It does change it to meters, but you can still, we just remind ourselves it was 34.5 inches. You can come in here, so we want the z-axis for the height. 34.5. Now you want to make sure you put inches, because if I just hit enter, it's now 34.5 meters. And I don't know who's going to be using that barrel. It's a little bit too big. So if we go 34.5 inches, it will convert that for us. It will work its magic to 0.876 meters, which is the correct height. But now we need to sort out the diameter, because that is 2 meters, and that's incorrect. So once again, let's go back to our reference. A diameter of 23 inches. So now what we can do is with my left mouse button, I can just hold and click both of these. I've forgotten because I've been talking. 23 inches, 23 inches. And there we go. Our barrel is now the correct dimensions. However, you might notice the scale is now off. And if you remember back to a previous lesson, we said you always want to be having your scale set to 1. Why is that? Well, if I took this into Unreal Engine now and we'd modeled it and we'd textured it and it looked fantastic, when I import it and then bring it into my scene, it will scale this up to a scale of 1. So it will put it back to 2 by 2 by 2. And all that nice work that we've done with our textures will be undone. So I'm just going to undo that. Let's see if you can remember how you apply our transforms. Can't quite remember, that's absolutely fine. So with this selected, we come up to Object, come down to Apply, and we've got our location. Well, our location's zeroed out. Our rotation, we haven't applied a rotation. Our scale is off. So let's apply our scale. And there we go. We've kept the dimensions, but we are now at a nice even scale of 1. So we'll leave it there. We won't worry about bringing it up onto the surface. You might want to put the origin at the bottom, and we can look at moving the origin around in a later date. But for what we're doing today, that's absolutely fine. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to move my UV map down here, my UV editor down here. I'm going to open another window, and I'm going to bring it down. And let's just bring that one into view. Here we go. And this one up here, we're going to make a shader editor. And this is quite normal for working. If you've got a nice big monitor, it's lovely. You've got your workspace just here. We haven't got any materials applied to it at the minute, which is why we can't see anything here. And we've got our UV editor. And this is the sort of the way we want to work. This is the nice uniformed way to work. So to apply a texture, the first thing we're going to want to do, if you remember the last lesson, is we're going to want to make a material. We can either make a new one, or we've got the default one that comes with Blender, and we might as well repurpose that. So let's hit that. And you can see once I've selected a material, it will automatically apply it to the entire of the mesh. And then if we want to add more materials, we can come in here, add a new one, and we can assign it to faces. But today, we are going to work with a single material. So I'm just going to remove that one. Let's name it properly. M_barrel. And you can see once I attached a material to our mesh, we got this in the shader editor. Now, if you're not seeing this, if you're using a bit of an older version of Blender, you might need to come up to Edit, Preferences, come to Add-ons, and write Node, and ensure that you've got Node Wrangler turned on. It normally comes with this box ticked, but some reason, some people it's not ticked. So just if you can't see what I can see just here, come up and make sure you've got Node Wrangler ticked. We'll also need this moving forward with the course. So now we've got a material applied to our barrel. We can assign it a color. Doesn't really matter right now because we'll be applying a texture in a minute. We can't see that unless we come into material preview mode. And you can see, as I said before in a previous lesson, this bit here of the properties is actually showcasing what shader we have attached to our material output. Okay, so we have got the principled BSDF, and that is attached to our surface, which is why we have it just here. Now you can see if I come to surface, we've got loads of different options just here, and I can change that. Or within the shader editor, if I just open this to make it a little bit clearer for you, you can come up here to add, or you can press Shift and A, come down to shader. We've got the same options. If you just take note of those just there, and then we've got them just there. So there's different ways you can use these. You can either use the shader editor, which is normally the easier way to work, or you can come in here and click on these little inputs and do it all from here. It's quite restrictive, but once you know what you're doing, if you've got textures already imported and you need to add it to another material, it can be quite quick to come in here and add your textures. So what we're going to do, we're going to add an image texture. So I'm going to search, and I did that by pressing spacebar because at the beginning of this course, we set our spacebar action to search. If you didn't do that or you're joining a bit later, you can come up to add, or you can press Shift and A with your mouse in the shader editor viewport. And you want to come down to texture and find image texture. There we go. If this ever disappears, you might have just pressed the arrow. You can just give that a click and it will reopen. Now in this lesson, we're not going to be creating a texture. We're just going to be get me words out, opening a single texture. So I'm going to go find it, and it's going to be in my references if I come to the right place. Come to the 3D workshop. This single texture just here. Now I made this from scratch with the help of AI. I just got my logo and I put some prompts in and I made two individual textures. So I made the side of the barrel that we're going to wrap around our cylinder. And I just got a single one for the top and bottom. Now it has got an entry for the barrel. You might want to, if you want to do it yourself, you might want to make one for the top and one for the bottom. We'll just use one for now. I then combine these two to make a single texture, and we have it now imported. Now, if you're not very artistic, if you don't have Photoshop, you don't have the necessary equipment to go and do that, just to follow along with this course, you can open up your chosen search engine and just search for something like barrel textures, okay? And find something that looks like this. Now, be careful if you're making assets for a game or a virtual production or whatever it is, be careful using things straight off Google or Bing, because firstly, you might not have permission to use this. And secondly, the resolution of this might not be very good. But for the purpose of this lesson, if you want to be nice and quick, search for a barrel texture, go and find one that looks good to you. Okay, there's loads of options online. You can even go metal barrel if you want, and then go and find one that works. We've got something just there. That's not quite right. This one's a nice, this one here is quite a nice option to practice with. You've got ones that include the whole texture, which is quite nice. We'll go into why that might be usable at a later lesson. You've got odd shaped ones, so maybe your barrel is going to have a bit of a bow in it, and that could be very useful. Go and find yourself a texture, save it to your computer, and import it as an image texture by going to Add Texture, Image Texture, into the shader editor, and then once you're here, we'll carry on. Cool. So now you've done that, you might notice, if I just bring these two quite close, our image texture has got an output of color, which is yellow, and our shader, our principled BSDF, has got an input, base color, which is yellow. There's a bit of a clue there. These two match up. So you can just drag off one and plug it in to the other. Now, nothing has happened within our viewport, and that is because if I just scroll along at the top by using my middle mouse wheel, okay, you can just move this menu if you can't see what we're trying to get to. We are in solid shading mode. You can come into solid shading and come down to texture and you'll see it appear, or you can come into material preview, and I'll just avoid render for now. You can do it, but I haven't got any lights set up at the minute, so it's a bit dull. I'm going to stay in solid shading. It's the most optimal workspace to be in. It gives us enough light to work on our object. And one thing I am going to do is we're just going to come down and quickly tick depth of field, cavity, and shadow. And we're just going to put the shadow up a little bit, change this one to both, and I just pump these up just whilst I'm working. And it just adds the detail, adds a lot more edge definition. It can be quite useful for when you're working, because at the minute we can see this is quite low poly, and I want to go for realism. I'm also going to change the shader up here to be a bit brighter, and there we go. And that's just by ticking depth of field, cavity, and shadow. Bump these two up by changing it to both, and change your shader to a nice bright one. So right now we have attached a texture to our material, okay? And we can see it's not quite working at the moment. So we need to fix that. So let's open up our UV editor a little bit more. Let's zoom into our workspace, hit the barrel, and go into edit mode. If I just zoom out a little bit, we can get a quick idea of what's happening here, what's going wrong. So this has been unwrapped already, all the primitive shapes have, but this top face, this one here, and this bottom face, as you can see, are a little bit bigger on our UV map compared to, if I just take this off, compared to our base image. So what can we do? Well, if I just take the UV sync, we can scale everything within our UV editor. We can rotate it and we can move it. So let's do that. Let's select these two. Let's hit S to scale, making sure my mouse is within the UV editor. And I can just focus on this for a second by pressing Control and Spacebar with my mouse over here. Now we've got the UV editor nice and big for everyone to see. So let's scale these two by selecting them both and then pressing S to scale. That could be good. And let's bring them down, which is on the Y-axis because it's a 2D space. And now individually, let's just try and place these so they look good. Yeah, that looks good. Right. Now we can see that the islands are a little bit smaller now, so I'm going to select both of them. I am going to come up to this little box here, pivot, okay, and select individual origins. And that will just scale them both in place now. And there we go. And whilst we're here, let's select everything there with just box selecting. Let's bring it down. So it's roughly in the middle. I'll leave it there for now, just so you can see what's happening. And to come out of this viewport, I'd press Control and Spacebar. There we go. Just by moving, if I just go into edit mode, just by moving this in the bottom face, okay, we can see it's already looking a lot better. Now the sides look great, but if I scroll around, we can see we've got these two black lines just here. And what's that? Well, if I click that one and I click that one, you can see that's these two faces that are at the end of our island. So we need to scale this inwards by selecting all of them, scaling on the X axis. Okay, let's just bring them in. I'm going to focus on this viewport again by pressing Control and Spacebar. Let's get right in so we can see what we're doing. We've got plenty of real estate. And let's just get this fairly central. And I'm just going to scale it with no constraints to about there. And now we need to scale it up on the Y. So S to scale on the Y. And look at that. Okay, let's move it down a little bit. Excuse me. A little bit more. And that looks good. Just make sure that we're in the line still. Yep. So if you are, I'm just going to untick this sync selection and press tab. If you're making your own texture, I've made a bit of an error here where my details of the side of the barrel are right up on this edge line, okay? And as you can see, it just makes it a little bit difficult to line our UV island up properly without going over. So I'm just going to have to come in a little bit. It's not ideal, but for now, it will work. So now let's have a look at how that looks. Look at that. So very quickly, with a single material, a single image, and a pre-unwrapped mesh, we can texture our asset. So it looks great, but we can do a little bit more to bring this really to life. I like realism. So how would we do that? Now, if you remember back a couple of lessons, I showed you some editing tools that Blender is great with, and we can use them to really add some definition. If I just click on this barrel, right click and shade smooth or auto smooth, it does make it look better. But once again, as I mentioned before, we're not capturing this shadow underneath. And when you look at the front profile, okay, if I just use annotate, it's a little bit flat here, okay? A barrel would normally have a little bit of an extrusion and all of these rings of metal that go around, okay? So with the texture applied, we can do that. So let's go into edit mode and think back. What editing tools do you think we can use? We need to cut around it, and maybe on the top, we need to inset and maybe extrude a little bit. So if you think you can do that, I'll give you this as a little bit of a challenge. With whatever barrel texture you have gone and found, go and add some additional details. Now, don't go crazy. Just add a couple of loop cuts if you've got some metal beading. If you've got the top, inset the top maybe, extrude it down, and don't forget the bottom, and see what you can come up with. Cool. So let's see how we can bring this to life. So I'm going to add a loop cut straight away in the middle. And I'm using the shortcuts because it's a little bit easier. It allows me to slide it straight away. I'm going to bring that loop cut up to the top. That looks good. Maybe I can bring that up a little bit more by pressing G, but you can remember if I press G, it stretches the texture. So we want to double press G to slide this loop. And now it's moving quite fast in the viewport. So I can just hold shift whilst moving my mouse to just finesse that to where I want it. And that looks good. We want the same down here. So control and R to add a loop cut, left mouse button, slide it into place. And I say we'll add all of the loop cuts and then we'll go in and edit the location to get them right where we want them. Control and R, left mouse button. Let's place that one in the middle. Show you another neat little trick. Do the same for this one. And I'm going to shift, alt, and select that loop up the top that I just did. And now to these two loop cuts going all the way around, I'm going to add a bevel with Control and B. And just open that up. And that just saves us a little bit of time. Looking good. So we know that that one's good. Let's do this one. Just have a little bit of a look. Looking good. This one looks like it could come up a little bit by double pressing G and sliding it with shift held. Perfect. Let's come down and have an inspector. This one, once again, I'm going to alt and left mouse button click on that loop cut to select it. Double G, shift, and slowly bring that one down. That one looks like it could do, oh, I press space. Alt, left mouse button click, double G, hold shift to make it nice and slow. There we go. And then this one, alt, left mouse button click. Yeah, let's just slide that one down a little bit. And there we go. So we went over what normals are in a previous lesson. If we just select this edge, so I am selecting all of those faces on that edge loop by holding Alt and then hitting the shorter line. I also want to do these two bands. So Shift, Alt, left mouse button click, Shift, Alt, left mouse button click, Shift, Alt, left mouse button click. If we come up to face, you've got something here that says extrude faces along the normal direction. Very useful. If we click that, we can now move all of those faces along the direction that their normals are facing. And if we want to be a little bit slower, once again, without clicking a left mouse button, you can hold shift and it just allows us a little bit more finesse, a little bit more subtle movements. And we just want to bring that out, say to about there. So already with just a couple of loop cuts and extruding some faces along their normals, you can see we're getting a nice result with our barrels, adding a bit more definition. So let's do the other faces. Let's get a bit more detail going, and then we'll come and fix some of the issues that we might have just created. So back into edit mode, we'll come up to the top and the bottom. And if I just come into top view by pressing 7 on my numpad, and I want to inset a face a little bit because you can see here the texture. We've got this edge just here. We want to keep that, and then we want to extrude this top down into the barrel. So if I press I to inset and bring that in, you can see what I'm doing there. We just want to bring that to that edge, like so. And now we want this face and this face to sort of be indented within the barrel a little bit. So we can hold E to extrude, okay? And then before we left mouse button click, we can press S to scale on the Z. And that will just allow us to scale both of those against each other. I'm just going to undo that. If you've got individual origins selected and you do that, extrude, scale on the S, on the Z, sorry, you can see nothing happens. All right, so if you're finding this is happening for you, I'm just going to undo that. Make sure you come up here to transform pivot point, go to median point, and then it will work. So once again, we're going to extrude with E, scale it with S, and constrain it to the Z. And now we can scale these inwards the same distance, the top and the bottom, which is very powerful. And we're just going to bring that to about there. Look at that. So we've already created a really cool asset. Now, before we leave today, we need to fix some of these textures. It might look great, but for the fine details, for those of you with a sharp eye, if I just come into material preview mode, give us a bit more light, this edge going around here, you can see, if I just focus on this, is very stretched, okay? Even up close, you can see we've got some nice mottling effect on the top. And we've got some nice effects just here, but that's a bit stretched. So what we're going to want to do is just re-unwrap these stretch textures. Now, it would be best practice to go and cut these seams, but because the cylinder that we're using to make this barrel, if I just select everything, comes unwrapped already, and we've done a pretty good job of keeping it within the same location that it previously came unwrapped in. We don't need to cut seams. We can just select the faces we want to unwrap and unwrap them. Okay, and I'm going to that in a second. So let's come back into the 3D viewport. We do also want to just go into edge select. Now, if you followed along with me and you've got a similar looking barrel, I've got two faces going around here. I've got an edge splitting all of these in half. And that's just giving me more geometry than I need. If I come up here to a mesh overlays, if I come to viewport overlays and come down to statistics, we always want to try and keep on top of our try count. Now, you might hear this a lot if you're getting into the 3D world. You want to try and keep this as low as possible. So having an edge going all the way around, if I come to edge select and just select that edge loop, having that edge split all of these faces into two is not ideal. So we've got, if I just select face select mode, we've got 32 faces, 64 faces where we could just have 32. So let's fix that. So let's select that edge and let's dissolve it by pressing either X and coming down to dissolve edges, or using the shortcut Control X. And we'll do the same on the bottom. Let's get back to this viewport, solid shading. Alt, left mouse button, click on this loop, and Shift, Control, and X just to remove that and dissolve it. We're just making it a little bit more optimal, and you always want to start thinking about that. So let's sort these textures out. We know that this one in here is a little bit stretched. So with that selected, by doing a loop select, Alt, left mouse button click, let's bring that one open and have a look. We can see that this selected edge, so it is a 3D, it is like a lots of quads. We can see in the UV editor, it is represented just by a single line, which is not ideal, which means that if you look at this edge just here, and then we have a look at it, this is represented as a cube, not as a cube, sorry, as a quad, and we can see it's a quad here. These look very similar. Okay, that makes sense. But all of these edges and faces are represented by a single edge in the UV editor, which is not ideal. It means they're all being colored by the color that's directly underneath there. So let's fix that. With them selected, come up to UV and just press unwrap with minimal stretch. You can play with these three. They all have slightly different abilities. If we go to unwrap with minimal stretch, and then I'm just going to control and spacebar in the UV editor. Let's have a look at this. You can see what that's done. It's re-unwrapped those faces into a nice cylinder, and we can place them onto our barrel tops to give them a nicer texture. So let's just scale that down and move it. Let's see what that looks like just there. We don't always have to have it in the same location. This is just a texture reference. So let's go and have a look. How does that look? It looks a lot better. So you can see I'm using the texture that's in the middle of the top of my barrel and placing it in a slightly different location on my mesh, but it looks great. So let's do the ring now at the top, because we removed that edge loop going around. We might just want to do this loop right here. And just looking in here, we might not even need to unwrap it, but I will just come into top view. And this time we'll use UV and we'll use project from view, because it is, if we just minimize, make this a bit smaller, if I just UV and project from view, you can see it's done the same sort of thing as before. If I just undo that, if I was in this view and I went to project from view, you can see what it does. So it literally unwraps it from the direction that the camera is at. So if I come into top view, project from view, and let's place that in the right place, right in the center. Let's make this bigger by pressing Control and Spacebar to focus. Let's go have a look. Let's scale this up into the right place, and look at that. That fits lovely. And Control and Spacebar to go back. Let's see what our work looks like. Do with maybe a little bit of a finesse, like so. That looks nice. I like this sort of edge we've got going on. It's a little bit off camber. So let's try UV with minimal stretch. Scale it down. Let's bring it in. What does that just look like if I scale that up a little bit? A little bit better. And you can see just by having a little bit of a play, making sure that everything lines up, we can get something that looks fairly good. Look at that. That's better. So now I just want to go and check all my model and find whether we've got some stretching. These darker areas, I think we can get away with it a little bit, but there is some stretching there. So what we'll do, we know that we extruded, so we'll select all of these by pressing Shift, Alt, and left mouse button click. Undo. That one, that's what we want. That one, that one, that one. We'll even do that one. We'll save that inside one for later. And we're not going to project from view. We will unwrap with minimal stretch. Now, you can see because I did all of them at once and I pressed unwrap with minimal stretch, it has placed them all in a nice uniformed pattern. We don't really want that, okay? So what we'll do is we'll undo that. We'll come to top view and we will use project from view this time. And that puts them all into a single location. You might not want to do this yourself. You can go and do them individually if you want and choose different locations within your barrel. Let's have a look. What does that look like? Much better. And then let's just do this bottom one. I'm going to press U to unwrap this time rather than going to the menu. So just U, minimal stretch, give that a scale. I've made this one a bit darker, so we'll use this one now. And oh, we'll just scale that in a little bit. And what face is this? Okay, that's just there, it doesn't matter. And there we go. Look at that, looking good. So it doesn't matter what design you went for. If we just look, if you went for a wooden one like this, you've still got some metal bands around, okay? If you've done all of the individual wooden planks inside and you sort of extruded them out, that's cool. You might want to go and re-unwrap all of these inside faces. So if we use this one, for example, if you have individually made planks by extruding all of these, you need to unwrap inside there. So have a play, go and see what you can make. And what we'll do in the next lesson is we'll find out how we can render this barrel out really nice. Because at the minute, if we just come into render view and we come up to render image, you can see there's no camera, we haven't got it set up, there's no lighting. So we'll fix that in the next lesson. We'll add some nice lights in it, we'll render it out, and we'll learn something called the 3-point lighting system. I hope you've enjoyed today's lesson. I hope you've made a cool barrel, and I look forward to teaching you in the next lesson. See you later. Bye.